I change my brain? Am I just a victim to who I am? I'm your host, Steve Sisler. Stay tuned for another episode of Behavioral Insights.
What is it with people? Why do they have such a hard time connecting at work? Why are we wired the way we are for connection? Teams in what makes a good one. Coming up next on Behavioral Insights. Glad you joined me today. Today we're going to be talking about teams, and I'm going to go ahead and say it. I've been thinking about it for quite some time, but to be honest, I haven't had the courage to say it, but I'm going to say it publicly right now. Team building is useless. It's absolutely useless. We're going to be talking about teams today, and like most of my content, it's driven by my encounters with clientele and the problems, challenges, and opportunities that I work with in companies when it comes to human behavior. I had a great call this morning with a manager. Well, I'm not going to call him a manager. He's really not a manager. That was the wrong thing to call him. But he's an individual on a team of 3. So he's one of the 3 people on the team. And the call I got today was basically him inquiring about how can he communicate better with a certain individual, one of the 3 people on his team. And the person we're going to call Susan. That's not her name, but we're going to just say that's Susan for this episode. I'm going to say that the person inquiring, his name is Paul. These aren't their real names. And then I'm going to say the third person is David, and that's not his real name either. So we got Susan, Paul, and David. And I'm just going to share with you the kind of call this was and a typical situation that you would find in probably any given company. So Paul calls me and he says, I'd like to discuss Susan. And I said, okay, what's Susan's last name? Because I obviously have her in my database. I wasn't at that moment familiar with Susan, but obviously she'd been profiled before because she works at this particular company. I look up Susan in the database and pull up her numbers. So this is how I do it. I just grab 11 numbers and I put these numbers in front of me while we're talking. So I'm wearing a headset, talking to this individual, and I'm looking at his numbers and I'm looking at her numbers, and I already know the numbers of the other individual because I just remember them off the top of my head. So I said, so what's going on with Susan? And he said, well, we're having difficulty with Susan, and Susan basically is struggling to meet deadlines. I said, okay. Let's look at Susan. So I'm looking at Susan right now while I'm talking to you here on this podcast. Susan's fear emotion is in a level of consistency equal to 80. And when Susan gets into work, it moves to an 84. So Susan is an 84 fear. Susan's optimism is a 27. And Susan's got the invisible cricket sitting on her shoulder, questioning everything she does because she's in the magic spot in her patient's consistency, which is a 52. Now, in my personal opinion, the 52 spot is the magic spot. It's the cricket's favorite spot. It's what makes the cricket so dreadfully annoying. A 50's not bad, a 60's not bad, but a 52 is not good. And you might be thinking, how do you know that and why is that? The honest answer is I don't know. But after thousands of profiles, this is the deal. This is what happens. Her anger is a 38, and that 38 anger is almost a 40. When it hits 40, even though it's not above 50, it kicks into play. Now, you've heard me say many times that if the anger is in play, that means it's above 50. That's when it becomes consistent. Anything below the energy line, which is the 50% point, is inconsistent. But I have discovered when you have high fear and an anger hovering around 40, you can feel it and you can see it. So that's just a sidebar. Because her optimism is a 27, it makes Susan extremely logical. Okay. Now, because when she gets to work, her fear goes up to an 84, and her anger drops down to a 30, that creates a specific dynamic. It creates two speeds, slow and slower. Okay, so she gets bogged down in the details because she has a planning brain that's highly structured. And so Susan's not really getting work done because Susan is overthinking. So she's approaching her work tasks with the same behaviors you would use to dismantle a bomb. Okay? All right, now I want to look at Susan's motivational orientations. Her curiosity level is an 89, so nearly 90. So now we've entered a new place. This is I just got this image in my mind of Mount Everest. So I've probably watched every documentary on climbing Mount Everest that there is. For some reason, I'm just fascinated with climbing Mount Everest. And there's a area up by the Hillary Step on Everest known as the Death Zone. And when they show this on these documentaries, they show this, it's like a glass ceiling. It's a 3D animated look with this blue lines, like a grid. And then the camera moves below and above the grid, and it really shows you where the death zone is. And if you cross that death zone, you start to die. And so your time from that death zone marker to the summit and back, I think you've got about 8 hours of oxygen at that point. But anyway, I brought that up because when your curiosity passes an 85 and your fear is an 80 or above, then you enter something like the death zone, but it's not death. It's a zone to where you start becoming more paralyzed when it comes to the need to know why or to uncover, discover, and recover the facts. So I'm picturing Susan getting really caught up in the weeds of what to do and why it needs to be done that way and this kind of a thing. She gets into the death zone. So I said this to Paul. And Paul said, okay. I said, now, is this making sense, Paul? He said, yeah, yes, it does. I said, so let me ask you a few questions. How long has this been going on? He said, at least 6 months. I said, okay. When was the last time you or David spoke to Susan about this? And that was at the point where I just didn't hear anything. I said, hello? I don't know why that's so funny. He said, well, I don't think we've mentioned it before. I said, oh, okay. I said, who's Susan's superior on the team? He said, I guess that would be David. Okay, now I just want you to grasp what's going on here. Susan's got some behaviors that are not working to the point of where David and Paul are having meetings about it, and then incorporate a consultant into the mix. But as far as David and Paul go, neither one of them have ever brought this up to Susan. I'm just listening to him, and I said, so David's the superior, and Susan's role answers to David's authority, yet David's not calling me, you are. And he's just quiet. And I said, Paul, you call this a team? And he just didn't know what to say. I said, this is not a team. This is a mess. I said, now the problem here is, I know how David's brain works. He's got an Attila the Hun profile, which means his brain says, get it done right, don't bother me unless it's an emergency. So he's not connecting with Susan. I already know that, now that I know that he's on the team and he's in charge. I know that Paul is a communicator, but avoids conflict, because I can see that in his numbers. So he's a conflict avoider. So they have a conflict that neither one of them want to do anything about. So they call the consultant for help. Now, I want you to imagine a team in a very profitable company. I don't want to name the company. And I don't want to say any more about this company, but extremely successful. Yet there's this team of 3 in this company that can't even properly communicate. And I told Paul, I said, Paul, this is simple communication. It's communication 101. You build relationships, and out of those relationships are expectations and things like this. And so there's no relationship here. Rules without relationship lead to rebellion. So as soon as you start coming to Susan and making some kind of a rule that you think you're going to get from me, she's going to rebel because there's no relationship there. I said, so how often do you speak with Susan, who's on your team? And he said, well, I pop in to her cubicle, now and again. Okay. How's that going? Well, what do you mean? Well, what do you say when you pop in? Well, apparently he pops in when he needs something, but he never pops in just to say hello. So there's nothing going on here. They work together, but they don't communicate on a personal level. Okay, now I'm looking at Susan's power orientation. It's a 66, so that's pretty high. I'm looking at her sacrificial set, and she's a 38, so that's low. And I'm looking at her efficiency line. It's a 61. Now, her individualism's a 36. And her regulatory or her regulated thinking piece is a 20, which means she doesn't want anybody telling her what to do. So here's a girl. She doesn't want anybody telling her what to do. Her power orientation indicates she needs to be in charge of her own space, her own work. So she's an island. And her efficiency is a 61, so she doesn't want to be interrupted. And her individualism is 36, so she's going to come off as very secure, which is going to frighten Paul because he's insecure. So he sees Susan emotionally as a threat. This is why he's not chatting with her. David isn't paying attention to any of this. He's too busy just working. So he's all task orientation. He's what we call head and hands. So he just thinks and does, thinking and doing. But he's got no heart or mouth. Okay? You either have head and hands or heart and mouth, or a combination of the four in some sense. But he has no heart and mouth, which means he doesn't connect. So he's called emotionally distant. So David's emotionally distant. Paul is insecure. Susan is an island. Susan hunkers in a bunker. She sees the world as cold, dark, and cruel. She believes she has to protect her assets or what belongs to her because of high fear and high power combinations. And she's got to protect it from hostile entities, which is going to be David, because of the way he's going to come across. Because Paul's not hostile, he's friendly, but insecure. So she'll think he's a baby. So these are the dynamics. And, these people do team building exercises. They'll have people come in and we'll do team building. You know what the problem is in organizations today? Team building is an event. It's just an event. It's a spend. We have a budget for team building. So we're going to spend, Thursday through Friday in March doing some team building exercises. Well, that's like going to the gym in March for 2 days and then going home and never going back till next year and expect to be muscle bound. That doesn't do anything. All that does is trick you into thinking you're fixing things, and you're not. What you're doing is you're going through the motions, but there's no emotion. So this is the problem at work. People go to work and they're all focused on their work, their space. They're looking around at the people around them and who is my competition? Who's after me? Who wants my job? Who am I afraid could throw me under the bus when I'm not looking? All these kinds of things. It's insanity, folks. Insanity. So I said to Paul, Paul, I'm not going to wave a magic wand over this situation and then all of a sudden you're all getting along. This is going to be a process. It's going to take 3 to 4 months because you have to first develop a relationship with Susan. You and David have to develop relationships with each other. Okay? That's what you have to do. You haven't done that. You're working together, but you don't relate. You don't even know how to tell Susan she's too slow. You can't do it. You got to call me for help in order to talk to Susan about Susan's speed. I want you people that are listening to this to stop for a second and think about that. Think about how crazy this is. I need to talk to Susan because her deliverables, they're not on time. And I've let this go on for 6 months, and I haven't said one word, not one word, to my teammate about why she's slow. On top of that, Paul says to me, we're willing to help Susan. We're willing to do anything to help Susan so that we could speed this process up. Well, have you told Susan this? No, he hasn't told Susan that he's willing to help. So this is what we got going on. How did Jim Jones, I don't know if you know who Jim Jones is. Jim Jones was a cult leader. I believe it was in the 80s, from California, who basically convinced his tribe, the people that followed him. He was some kind of a Christian evangelist at first, and then slowly went crazy. But he had a church that was called the People's Temple. It was largely an African American congregation, but there were other nationalities in there as well. But he convinced over 900 people to move to Guyana, or wherever the heck it was, and live in the jungle, and then drink poison. Okay? How did Jim Jones get 900 people, or whatever, it was around 900 people, to move to another country, live in the woods, and then drink poison? Do you know why? It's a simple answer. Because he paid more attention to them than anybody else in their life. And this is why they abandoned family and friends. Because they saw the Reverend Jim Jones as somebody who cared more about them than anybody else in their life, to the point that they would kill themselves because he asked them to. Now, this whole example couldn't be more insane, but there's a couple things I want to pull out of it. Imagine if Reverend Jim Jones had the people's best interest at heart. Imagine if he was a messenger of goodwill. And then imagine if he knew exactly what he was talking about. What could have happened? How much better those people would have been. So if you're on a team and when I see you coming, to my office because you need to speak to me, what am I thinking? Do I get a little bit excited, like, oh, here comes Paul, I wonder what Paul needs? Or are you thinking, what does he want? When you see somebody coming that's on your team, or maybe they're not coming, what are you thinking? Where's Paul? Where's David? Or what can I do to help David or to help Paul? Or what could Paul or David do to help me? Or what could Susan and David do to assist me in this situation? Like, how can we put our heads together and become the one team in this company that's the envy of everybody else? Well, I guess that wouldn't be work, would it? What would that be? That might be a cult, right? Or some crazy thing like that. When you compare to work today. Now, don't get me wrong. There are probably a few teams like this. But most of them, absolutely not. People don't thrive work. They survive work as a rule. And this is based on 16 years of working with teams. they just don't do that. And I told Paul, I said, Paul, you know me. I'm not your average consultant. I want Susan to want you to help her because she knows that if she gets some help from you, she'll learn something, she'll be better for it, the team will be better for it, and then the company can reap the rewards. But apparently, nobody on this team is having these thoughts at all. I hung up that phone and I sat for a second, and I would say I sat in some stunned silence. I sat thinking, did I just have this conversation? Did I just talk to a gentleman that has been working for months on this little 3-person team and for 6 months has been wondering why Susan isn't getting her work done on time? And it's causing such a problem that they got to get a consultant involved. And nobody has talked to Susan about this. What level of relationship do you have to be on to avoid somebody like this? And then you have to solicit help outside of the organization to have a normal conversation. I just want you to think about this. If you think for 1 minute companies are functional, you're wrong. When I started consulting, I'll be honest with you, I was intimidated because I'm thinking, these are all big, smart people. They've been around the block. They're in corporate, they wear suits, whatever. And when I started getting involved in organizations and companies and teams and all this, I couldn't believe what I saw. I was wrong. These people are not socially intelligent. These people are not really emotionally intelligent. These people are afraid to have crucial conversations where the stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions could run strong. So they just pretend nothing's wrong until they can't. It's crazy. So I told Paul, you need to work on building relationship with Susan. You have David call me, or you relay this information to David, and David can call me. But the two of you don't know how to be friends. That's the problem. And now you need something, and you don't even know how to get it. You know instinctively that the conversation you want to have is going to go sideways with Susan because you haven't developed any relationship with Susan at all. And that's a really big problem. So all you're going to get from me is build that relationship. Be the person when she sees you coming, she's happy. She feels good inside. She sees that I'm going to learn something, or maybe Paul's going to learn something. But all I know is this. We're going to have some back and forth. We're going to communicate, and we're both going to be better for it so that we can be better for our organization. Can you imagine what that would be like, right? But that's not going on right now at all. And so, I just wanted to talk about this. I just wanted to bring this up and share with you so that you could think about where you are. What are you doing in work? Who are you with in work? Who are your peers in work? Are you afraid that if you give somebody else more knowledge than they already have, that they're going to somehow be your competition? If you're a manager, are you trying to set your people up to be better at what you all do than you are? Are you trying to develop your people so that they could be super successful in their role? Are you pulling all for one and one for all so that you can succeed as a group like the Three Musketeers? And I use that illustration with Paul today. I said, you guys should be like the Three Musketeers. You should be like the volleyball team that puts their hands into the circle and says 1, 2, 3, hooray, or whatever they do, that little chant before they get ready to play the final set. But no, you guys aren't even talking to each other. You guys only speak when you have to, and you have no idea how Susan's going to react when you try to inform her that she's not doing enough to pull her weight on the team, because you're not a team. You've got nothing going on over there, and that's your problem. If you would focus on the people, focus on the person, and stop trying to be so damn professional and be a little personal, you wouldn't be having these problems. People wouldn't need me if they just were human at work and not so afraid of failure and not knowing the answer and all this crazy crap. But it's sad, it's really sad. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're on a team, get to know each other, get personal, find out their favorite movie, go to lunch. Have these three ever been to lunch? No, they've never been to lunch. I don't know what to say. That's crazy. So you have to get to know each other on a personal level. Just because you're at work, it doesn't mean, you turn into androids. These are human beings. You're a human being. What's happening is, in the brain, I want to bring this up. This is something else I thought of, and I brought it up to Paul in our conversation. Human brains send off one of two signals. Human beings are animals with a neocortex, a frontal lobe, the part of the brain that reasons, schemes, and plans, the part of the brain that predicts the future, the part of the brain that solves math equations. It's the reasoning center of the brain. That's what separates you from a white-tailed deer, is the neocortex. And so, like a deer, though, you have a limbic system. You have a, quote, old brain. You have a, quote, lizard brain. You have a brain stem. And deeper into the brain are all the automatic pieces, like your heart beating, breathing, producing white blood cells, making sure your cells are dividing, things like this, things you're not conscious of but are actually going on. That part of your brain regulates those things and makes sure they happen. Your limbic system is your emotional/warning center. Now, when human beings, like white-tailed deer or any other animal, when human beings see another human being, so I'll, for this instance, say, here comes Paul walking towards Susan at her cubicle. There are signals that start happening in the brain. You're sending signals. And what does that signal say? It either says approach or avoid. That's it. Everybody is sending approach or avoid signals. Now, looking at Susan's profile, Susan is sending an avoid signal. There is no doubt about that. David is sending an avoid signal. There's no doubt about that. And Paul is probably sending an approach signal, but himself fears approaching people who send avoid signals. So that approach signal really isn't doing him any good at all. And these are the dynamics. You have to make sure that when you're working with people, you're sending out approach signals. It's okay to approach. I want you to think of an ancient king sitting on a throne holding a scepter. And when people entered the king's court and he moved the scepter forward, it meant, come hither, come towards me, okay? If he didn't, you didn't move lest you lose your head, okay? We're talking even before medieval times. And so that was the signal. The scepter was the approach or not approach or / avoid signal. Now, when we work with people, you send an approach or avoid signal simply by the way you look at them, your attitude, your body language, how you make someone feel. So now, Paul has to break into Susan's world, because getting to know Susan, because she's high power and low sacrifice, and high fear, that means it's going to be like robbing a bank successfully to get to know Susan. It's going to be like trying to break into a Brinks truck to get to know Susan. She's no convertible with the top down and the keys in it, folks. She's hard to get to know. And you'll never know her at work like you could outside of work, probably. So what do I do about that? How do I become Susan's ally? How do I become a trusted ally? How do I become a person that she can confide in? How do I become a person that she can come to me and say, you know what, I'm really not feeling good today. And I was wondering if you could maybe help me with something. How do we become that kind of a person? Is that vulnerable? You bet it is. But people are afraid to be vulnerable because they see it as a negative. There's so much I could say here. But I'm rambling. I can tell I'm rambling. I haven't edited this or cut it. I've just been talking, looking with 11 numbers sitting in front of me. And you know what I wanted to do? I kind of wanted to get this off my chest. So let's wrap this up. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about yourself in your work and who you work with, who you work closely with. What kind of relationship do you have with that person? What kind of relationship do they have with you? How do they perceive you? How do they see you? Do they see you as one they can approach, or do they see you as one they want to avoid? What signals are you sending with your face? Think of the person you tell the joke to and they just stare at you. You ever going to go up to them with another joke? No, you're not. So the face is the signpost that allows another human being's limbic system to believe that they can approach you. Okay? That's what the face is. It's a signpost. Facial expressions is a signpost. Every human being in every continent of the earth, every tribe, mad, glad, sad, and scared, look the same on every human face. That's the universal language of behavior. Okay? And so what kind of signals are you sending? Happy? Sad? Scared? Mad? What do they sense when they look at you? Do you smile? And if yes, do you show your teeth? Do you squint your eyes? Do you smile with your eyes, or are you just smiling with your mouth? Because that's fake. That doesn't work. You really need to be cognizant of what it takes to develop a relationship with a stranger, somebody you work with. Okay? And to the degree that you invest into developing a real personal relationship with another human being at work will be to the degree that you are on a winning team. I hope that's helpful for you. I hope you can learn something from this. And if not, well, I can't believe you made it this far. If you're still listening. So that's all I got today. This is episode 9. And we've been talking about teams and relationships. And join us next time on Behavioral Insights.